problem, but it is a problem. But here's the real challenge, the final challenge I'm going to leave you with. Many people want to claim, based on the brain science, and not only brain science, but on the psychological science as well, that all this mental state causation I've been talking about is just an illusion. Your mental states play no role in causing your behavior. Zero. They are just post hoc rationalizations for what your brain has already physically done. By the way, whenever we hear words like the brain decides or the brain knows, the brain doesn't know anything. The brain doesn't decide anything. People know things. People decide things. Brains are just physical organisms that go through physiochemical transformations. Right? So, I call this the threat of the disappearing person. You're not the kind of creature you think you are, and that the law presupposes, and that your everyday behavior presupposes. So, let me run through briefly the kinds of evidence and why it's bad evidence. First, we're not aware of the causes of what we do. Well, what a surprise. Who could possibly be aware of all the causes of what you do? Suppose you have no idea why you're doing what you're doing. Does it mean you're not doing intentionally, or you don't know what you're doing at the moment? Of course not. Second of all, there's all this automaticity in our behavior. True enough, and we certainly see this with neurological disorders and the like. But you can't infer from the normal case from the neurologically impaired. And the fact that there is a fair degree of automaticity in our behavior, I say hooray for. Imagine if we had to deliberate about each and every single thing we did. Then there are the manipulation studies. You can show in a laboratory experiment that people can be manipulated into thinking that their mental states are affecting the world when they are not. Well, okay, you can be manipulated. Are you being manipulated? Did anyone manipulate you when you raised your non-dominant arm? And then there's all the localization evidence, the wonderful thing that Sharon talked about earlier, where you see in the newspaper every Tuesday. Here is where the brain activates compared to base rate activation when you do this task in the scanner. Well, who would ever expect that the whole brain would be recruited to every single task there is? Well, of course there's going to be some brain activation. Here's what I can assure you. My speech center is more activated now than yours. What a surprise. As they say in Southern California, gag me with a spoon, right? I mean, of course, if your brain is dead, you're dead. What a surprise. But then there's the granddaddy, getting real close to finishing now, is the studies of Benjamin Libet, a great neuroscientist at the University of California, San Francisco, who had the following experimental setup. Most of you probably aren't aware of this, but here's what he basically did. You basically put an EEG on the scalp near the supplementary motor area of the brain, and you ask a subject to raise his index finger or flex his wrist whenever he feels like it, at random, for no good reason. The only reason he has to do anything is sort of to cooperate with the experimenter generally. But any individual finger lifting, and subject's looking at a clock, and the subject is asked to identify when he, or he mostly, became aware of the intention to flex their finger, or flex their wrist or move their finger. And it turns out about 400 milliseconds earlier, there was activation, a readiness potential in the supplementary motor area, and about 550 milliseconds from the beginning of the activation to the action itself. So somewhere between 100 and 150 milliseconds between awareness of the intention and actually doing it. And people want to say about that, oh my goodness, doesn't that just prove the brain does it all and your intentions play no role? It doesn't show that in the slightest. All it shows is that there's neural activation in the supplemental motor area first. So, second of all, it doesn't show that the intentions that were actually formed weren't causal. And remember, I've never denied the brain's part of the story. Of course it is. A readiness potential is not a decision. And just in terms of the whole story, we don't have any idea about the whole story anyhow. That's neuroarrogance. So the Libet stuff is really good neuroscience. It's very interesting, but it doesn't stand for the proposition. Now, what's the evidence that we are not disappearing persons? First, your common sense. Secondly, the impossibility for cooperative social animals like ourselves to deny the existence of other minds with causal efficacy. If you are in a social relationship, that is a presupposition of a social relationship, that we have minds and that we have causal efficacy. There's a ton of direct laboratory evidence for the causal efficacy of intentions. The ability of primates to read the intentions of other creatures has been present, and this has been experimentally demonstrated since starting in 2007, in New World monkeys who split off from us 40 million years ago. So this has been evolutionarily conserved, as Anna Rose said earlier on, for at least 40 million years. Do you think your mental states are like your appendix? They do nothing? Something that plays such an obvious and overwhelming role of what it means to be a cooperative social creature. The last thing I want to leave you with is, if you believe this story of the disappearing person, it is morally and politically inert. If we are not creatures who act for reasons, in the sense that those reasons really make a difference, then all our moral and political lives have no normative basis. We have no ground to argue to each other. It's just brains, and brains don't argue to each other. We are intentional and deliberative creatures. That's what evolution has produced. My challenge to neuroscience is this. Rather than explaining away how our brains produce consciousness and intentionality, they should explain it. Thank you.